your mind, lost
for materials, but it's still um, at its core a meat machine of some type. So, at
Yeah.
what point does the transition occur? And um, obviously, if you know anything about AI, we're not even close. We're not even close to have something that is conscious. But I think that the
Yeah.
you always have to be keeping an eye out for it. But
Well, for sure. It's like also where, okay, this is kind of the thing where I kind of come in with thinking. Our bodies naturally have an endocannabinoid system. So our bodies naturally are able to produce and process cannabis. You have to like think to yourself for a second, didn't happen yesterday. This probably happened over a long time of evolution. If you look down at it, it's where we ourselves have been upgraded over time as humans. So there is that aspect to it as well, where it's like even within ourselves, there's these deeper layers of our connections with vast amounts of things around us. We constantly need to create things.
yeah, and in my studies in psychology, I've looked into it some, and the endocannabinoid system in the human brain is
Yeah.
one of the oldest systems,
Yeah.
and um, neuroscientists really aren't exactly sure what it's for yet. They know some of its functions, but the importance of it isn't really well known at this point. But yeah, and you can
It's
look at the whole human brain and see it, the process of evolution in it, from the hindbrain to the midbrain to the cerebral
subconscious.
cortex.
Hmm.
Yeah, so yeah, the idea of being upgraded over time, that's really not a bad metaphor for human
Evolution.
evolution. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. It's just so it's so baffling because the whole idea is to constantly being able to advance. Of course, there's always a level of science fiction and fear when it comes to a lot of things. I mean, in particular, one of those conversations is when you talk about AI and technology, right? What about valuable resources in regards to energy? Okay, there's hemp, there's nuclear power, and then you say nuclear power, they're like, oh my God, what? What's wrong with you? And I'm like, dude, we're in the 21st century. I almost 100% positive we have scientists and the technology and the capability to do a lot better than we did 60 years ago. And that is not a long time ago. That is a very short period of time. So it just shows you the level of advancement that we can get, but we can still limit ourselves at the very same time based off of fears that are no longer relevant.
Yeah, and if not no longer relevant, certainly better understood and better controlled. So yeah, I don't think that there is a solution to the climate crisis and where we're at in the world
Oh
without
no.
nuclear power. I think the nuclear power um has to be an integral part of um the resource allocation in the future, because there are things that wind and solar and hydropower just can't do, or the
Not
amount of
capable of.
resources.
Yeah.
Yeah, the amount of non-green resources you have to expend in order to build the type of power grids needed to sustain large-scale energy are in themselves not environmentally friendly. So
It's the same thing with electric cars because of the amount of minerals and resources you have to get. And then keep in mind that the power sources that are used to power these cars are primarily powered by coal or sometimes fossil fuels. So it's not necessarily saying that, oh my God, well, how could we do such a thing? That's just the level that we're at because of very, like, again, limitations are one of them, fears is another one. um Understanding of complexity and different ways of how things operate, we are still kind of new pertaining to those kind of things as well. So this is what we have available to us, this is how we know how to be able to make this work, this is what we do, right? Simple as that.
yeah, I wish I could take credit for it, but it's not my quote. But I can't remember who said it, but I really like it a lot. Um, Today's solution is tomorrow's problem, right? Meaning that if you look at how humans have expended resources in the past, like, okay, well, we discovered fire, right? And then as the human, fire allowed the human race to expand all over the world, into colder environments, and allowed us to cook meat and do all these things. So then we
Yeah,
cut down all the forests, right? And then when it became evident that cutting down all the forests wasn't feasible, we discovered coal, which is a much more energy dense resource and burns much cleaner than wood. But coal has its own issues. And then we discovered oil, which is much more energy dense than coal, but comes with its own issues, right? So
correct.
it's all part of human development, right? There's some demonization of utilizing resources, but heck, that's the world we live in, right? You have to use resources in order to live. So, and that's never going to change, right? It doesn't matter how green we get things. We're always going to have to wear clothes. We're always going to have to eat food. We're always going to have to build shelters.
Right.
But we just have to find more and more efficient ways to do it.
It's also like that idea with decentralization, because the second that you get centralization, like pertaining to technologies and things of like this, you get an agenda. There's always going to be, well, we want to do it our way. We're not going to do it your way. No. We want to do it our way to benefit ourselves, regardless of what that is. So then there comes a parameter of, so now you're limiting that. So only you have access and nobody else does. And it sounds sweet on paper, we're trying to protect. Yeah, but what exactly are we selling for that protection?
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at the the largest sponsors of green energy, it's all the oil companies, right?
Oh, yeah.
And
The same
so
way that vape companies are all sponsored by Philip Morris and all the cigarette companies.
yeah, and so sure, you can look at it altruistically and say, oh yeah, well, they're trying to do what's best for the environment, but I think that the bottom line is money, money and control of the energy sector. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And it's just like, I don't know. You sometimes have to ask yourself, like, spending all of this time getting into the intricate parts of different things and the aspect of way of how things move. Why spend your time fixating on these things? And it's not where you're fixating. I feel it's more of a way connecting to a world around you that's a lot bigger than you are, and just having a little bit more understanding behind the scenes instead of what you just see.
Yeah, and I think that's a big problem in modernity that is largely driven by our technology. Um, we have this focus on self, right? I mean, I think especially with generations a little bit younger than me. I think about my nephew growing up, right? And he from the time he was born, we were printing uh, photo albums off the internet, right? Hardcover photo albums of him, and you could do all these things, and the world just centers around you, right? And it's not a really healthy psychological place to be in, to have this, to only be able to see things from your perspective, right? I think that when you're able to situate yourself in the world and sort of contextualize your viewpoint with those of others and nature and everything else, it leads you to make a lot better decisions.
It does. And it just honestly, it's instead of fixing the world's problems, it's being able to fix your own problems for your own self. You know, I'm not, I never majored in philosophy, but one thing, especially like with the friends that I've had, it comes into play when you have those conversations with people and you're trying to make that connection of things of, well, so how does it work? Why does it work that way? What's another one thing that I always found fascinating is, does anybody think about the fact that we are just on an organic spacecraft? I've said this hundreds of times. We're on an organic spacecraft. Think about it. It's made out of organic material, but it technically does the same thing a space rocket would do. It orbits, it flies, it has its own parameters, it's on an axis, it has its like, even within nature, there is this complexity behind it. It's not just a simple, it's not as simple as we think it is. I don't know.
Yeah, Yeah, it's kind of like what I was saying at the beginning of the episode with AI and the human brain, right? The human brain is a piece of
Tech,
technology
yeah.
in a way, right? Um, we mentioned it on one of my episodes about a month ago. I was talking about it. The brain is kind of like alien tech that we just stumbled upon, right? Because with your car was built by humans, and so if anything goes wrong, you can go through the schematics, you can go through the user manual and figure out a way to fix it. But the history of psychology, particularly psychiatry and medicine, right, is um, trying to develop a medicine for a certain mental disorder and trying it out on people, and then finding out that it actually does something completely different, and not knowing why it does that thing, but then just prescribing it in that way. And that might scare a lot of people to know that, but that's pretty much the way that the pharmaceutical drug industry works. A lot of the drugs that people take, um, psychiatrists they don't really know why it works or the exact mechanisms,
Hmm.
and it was usually developed to treat something else. So the human brain is it's alien tech to us, right? It's like something that crash landed on Earth, and now we're trying to figure it out retrospectively, but we didn't build it, so we don't know the all the intricate workings of it.
One of the things that I found was so fascinating, they did research with psilocybin, and the research was seeing how psilocybin interacts with the human mind. And you can see with the scans, it's like as if like they touch, make a connection, and then like kind of understand each other and then work together and go throughout the entire body. So this is fungus. This is fungus. This is something that like, that grows literally out of nowhere. It's like a freaking wizard in the forest. And it knows how to interact with the human brain.
Yeah, it is interesting. And especially, you can see it do the same thing with plant life, right?
Oh yeah.
Fungus is sort of just the fruiting part of the plant, but the mycelium,
Is
which is
underground.
yeah,
Yeah.
the roots of the fungus underground, and it'll connect trees and forests and all the plants,
Hmm.
and it basically ferries resources back and forth. And what you'll find is that trees will favor trees that are related to them, their family members, right? Trees that are sick and know they're dying will get rid of their resources. They'll spread them onto somebody else. Trees that are in danger will send messages to other trees underground through the fungus, letting them know, hey, there's a fire or there's insects or something, so that the other trees can start marshaling defenses against it. And so fungus acts as this communicator, right? So when
It's
you
like
think
almost
about it,
AT&T, you know?
yeah,
It's like
yeah,
AT&T for the forest.
right, right. And so, yeah, when you think about it, being, you know, yeah, consuming a fungus, a mushroom, and then having it sort of broaden the communication network within the brain, you go, oh, well, it's sort of analogous to what it's doing with plant life in some way.
It's just the way that plant life in itself interacts. It's where, depending on the season, the humidity, the climate, the time of year, there's so many factors, and you can see how the crops changes. One of the ways we know this is from food science, where you have scientists that literally spend the entire year studying seasons and plants, figuring out what causes this disease, why does this insect affect this plant particular and not the other one. So there's all of these intricate pieces that come to fold even within plant life. It's like we as humans are like, huh, how do we figure that out? Oh, okay, we do that and we change it. Oh my god, now we got more cucumbers. I don't know. I'm just throwing that out.
Yeah, yeah.
But
No, I think what we've been talking about so far, the point that we're highlighting is human bias, right? We have this sort of view that the humans are occupy a privileged place in nature, and we sort of understand things, and that when we apply categories to things, that means something, right? So the fact that a computer can do what a human brain can do, that doesn't it couldn't be conscious because it's a different type of thing. It's a different category of thing, right?
it's a program on top of a program with an algorithm on top of a program. That's how that's how my math teacher explained it to me.
Yeah, yeah. So And I mean, it goes for anything, right? Where
Yeah.
it's just we like to categorize things, and then through those categorizations, feel like we've come to know something about the thing that we're looking at. But really, reality is much too complicated for that simplistic a view to be true, right? And on top of that, how limited our sensory data is. Our eyesight and our hearing and everything else is so limited. And then the 3 pounds of meat inside our head, trying to put it all together, um, it's just not up to the task. But
Yeah, and it's interesting also because when you think about, particularly with human psyche and the way that brain function, we as humans can protect ourselves to a certain extent, right? But the reality is that there are many other creatures, many other animals that are way more powerful than we are. Stronger, more resilient, can survive better than we can, but they're not as capable as humans. Like bears, as a great example. As clever as they are, and as great as hunters and they are, as powerful they are, they can never be as capable as humans. There's a lot of reasons. There's a
yeah,
lot of reasons.
yeah, and that's the interesting thing is if you look at the history of evolution across the planet, that history is always I mean, it's centered on survival and reproduction. And it takes a variety of different strategies, but those strategies tend towards physical domination of an environmental niche, right? So
Yeah.
you want to be able to take advantage of the food sources and the climate and terrain of your environment. And humans are really a bit of an oddball, right? Because like you just mentioned, we're not faster than anybody, we're not stronger than anybody, we don't blend in, we don't have anything special about us other than this brain. And it's sort of like, well, how did that get evolutionarily selected for if in the early stages, like we were talking about earlier, if you sort of look into the brain and look at the early structures of it, the hindbrain and the midbrain, they didn't have the powerful cognitive capabilities that modern humans have. So why would evolution suddenly start selecting for that to be our sort of superpower before it really had any um, real survival advantages? It's kind of an interesting question.
This is where I start to like leaning into the stoned ape theory,
Mm,
which is a theory, but it seems very plausible. Where at an early stage of human evolution, it's possible that humans ate fungus or mushrooms, and they may have found that as to be a food source. So it's possible that that fungus had an interaction with our brains chemically, changing our brains over time. So that could explain why our brains have this unique interaction with psilocybin. That would explain it, right? Um, but we don't know. But you're right. That is like a very big mystery. It's like where did where did we go up the hill and skip all of the rules? Because it seems like, like think about it, like primates. They're in the Stone Age.
yeah, yeah. I've heard the stoned ape theory, and I think that it explains it just as well as anything else. The one thing that hangs me up about it is just that um, the human species as a whole would have to all be at least related to a small group of humans. So basically, you're looking at, um, the functional changes that would have taken place in the brain from consuming psychedelics would then have to be those traits would have to be phylogenetically passed on to future generations and then propagated throughout the entire human species. So the
There's
chances that
also
all of them consume psychedelics, I go,
yeah,
I don't know. It seems pretty far
you're
fetched, but
right. There is that, and also there's to take into account, and people don't like to think about this as where one of the advancements of human evolution is interculture. So meaning you have someone from one culture from another, they mate, they have children, and those children have children, and so on. How do I know this? I'm Jewish. I come from that. Okay. So you're talking about 6 or odd thousand years. You have a lot of people that are doing this. you combat different types of illnesses that other genes may have not had. So you just added that to the bucket. People could have been from a colder climate and then a hotter climate. You mix that together. So then your kids have possibly equal qualities to be able to survive in those. There's so many of those pieces as well. So there is that idea where if you look at other species, they're primarily tribal. Like wolves, particularly with gray wolves, they stay with their packs. They don't change packs. It's very rare. There's very particular crazy circumstances for that. It's not a thing in nature, but we as humans constantly do it. So there's that as well.
Yeah, no, that's a big part of it is the size of the groups. Like you're saying, even our closest relatives, right? Bonobos, chimpanzees, these sorts of things. You rarely have groups that are above a couple dozen. And it's funny, like if you think about the largest groups in nature besides humans, you're looking at like ants, right? Something that have a far less cognitive capability than humans, but they appear to have some kind of hive mind. They have this ability
and
to
very
work.
diverse. They're very diverse.
This ability to work together. And I mean, speaking of them, they're fungus farmers, right?
Yes.
Leaf cutter ants, they'll go and they'll cut leaves, not to eat, but they bring them back and they have a certain type of fungus that they farm. They feed it this leaf that it likes eating, and then they eat the fungus, right? So yes, but humans among mammals, certainly, you have, again, elephants, a couple dozen members in a group. Humans, we went beyond this. And how did we go beyond this? It's cultural, right? And so this is where the myth of the alpha male gets broken. And
it doesn't exist with humans. I know.
Yeah, a little bit of scientific background. It actually doesn't exist really at all. There was a researcher who was studying wolves, and he thought that he had picked up on there being an alpha male in a pack.
Wait a minute. So there isn't an alpha and a beta. So there aren't alpha and betas in wolves, really?
Yeah. So basically, there was a researcher that was looking at wolves, and he sort of developed this hierarchy. But he had been studying wolves that were in captivity.
I see.
In captivity, they developed this hierarchy. And then a few years later, the same guy went out and looked at them in nature. And what he found was the hierarchy didn't exist. And the closest it came was there was actually a female wolf that was, closest to being a decision maker of some kind. But he retracted it all afterwards. And then, of course, there were
that would play more of like a motherly role.
Yeah,
like
and then there was
the pack, yes.
Then there were pseudoscientists that somehow wanted to apply this to human beings. But what you find is that even in our closest ancestors, right, in bonobos and chimps and things, the alpha male, the biggest, strongest male, doesn't tend to be the tribe leader. Because what happens is if he starts trying to throw his weight around, several of the smaller males will gang up on him and kill him. Right? And if you look at it, that's how human society developed, right? As long as you have a big, strong tyrant that can push everybody around, your groups are going to stay small because he can only exercise that control over so many. But once you have groups of individuals that can develop social orders, right, then you're looking for the smart individuals, the ones who can make the best choices, the ones who can find the food, provide the shelter, the ones who can work with others well. Once you have that, then your groups can grow to larger sizes. But the alpha male sort of myth is not only does it not exist, but alpha males who try to establish themselves, whether in humans or in primate species, they don't tend to have good outcomes.
In particular, even with humans, and I'm talking like in regards to interactions that I've had with other people. There are going to be those that have a more dominant side. Okay, that is a general characteristic that people can have. But being a dominant person doesn't make you a person that's better than others. Because that's where that, the alpha male or female, whatever, prediction and psyche, that ideology of where I'm better than you because I'm the alpha. There's a difference between dominance and alpha. And I do think that there is definitely a clear line between those two.
Yeah, from corporate psychology, industrial organizational psychology, what they've found is that um, the people who tend to rise to leadership positions, CEOs and this type of stuff, they strike a balance, right? They strike a balance between um, being dominant and being assertive, but also being open to input from others and knowing when to trust their decision making and when to change their opinion, right? The ability to change your mind and to be open to outside influences of information, and for the people under you to recognize that ability in you. That's what causes you to succeed in leadership positions and ultimately to be appointed to them in the first place, right? So yeah,
Right.
there's certainly characteristics of I wouldn't say aggression or dominance, but decisiveness, right? There's elements of decisiveness that people in leadership roles need to have and comes naturally to some people. Um, but really, the bread and butter of leadership and of human society is is a group effort.
Yeah, and it's very much honestly when it comes down to community also. And there can be a negative side to it. Sometimes people can feel that community can be definitely constrictive, but there is self creation of community where you can create your own type of community and people that you interact with. You know, it's interesting because when you look at, for example, technology like AI in a way is kind of like that. It's trying to figure out the community of something and what makes it work. How does it work? Why does it work that way? And we as humans constantly do that all the time. So if you think about it, we're kind of like AI, but just slower, a lot
Yeah.
slower.
Yeah, I mean, really, the the term AI is just sort of a misnomer, right? Artificial intelligence doesn't really exist. There's just intelligence, right? And
Yeah.
intelligence, how do you define it? You mentioned you were just listening to my last episode. I really like the way that Jordan Miller sort of
Oh,
defined it, right? This
he did an
this
excellent job.
ability, this ability to identify networks in the world and then to most efficiently sort of figure out ways to use them to your advantage, right? The most effective use of networks, whether they're social networks or whether they're relationships between physical properties of objects or whatever it might be. That's intelligence, right?
This is what created the personal computer. Was
Yeah.
that, to be able to interact and connect computers around the world, allow scientists to send information instantly and be able to make those predictions. Because the thing in the end of the day is, it's like you can do so much with the brain, and then you need an outsource. You need something that you can compute, something that you can do to be able to create those things. So, what do you need to be able to create those things? You have to create that technology to be able to do that. And there's all those steps that come with it where you're not necessarily the one that's doing it, you're the one that's making it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's and that's I mean, ultimately that's what intelligence kind of is, right? Is this ability to look at things that to most people might not be related at face value and sort of connect the dots, right? And the more diverse dots you can connect, that's the history of innovation, right? The things that we take for granted now, smartphones and that sort of stuff. At one point, there was one person or a team of people or an entire, company, organization of people that together, had a vision of something that does not exist, right? And sort of connected the dots and made use of all of the diverse networks available to them in order to make it a reality. So yeah, intelligence, creativity, it's all sort of interconnected. But this idea of artificial intelligence, right? That because a computer's doing it, it's something different from what a human being is doing. I kind of lean towards intelligence just being intelligence, right? It's just this operation this functionality that exists across humans and across computers, and even to a lesser extent, other forms of life as well.
Yeah, this honestly like reminds me of with Star Trek, because with Star Trek, even like within the early series from the '60s, people always say, "Well, they didn't have computers." They did. They had computers. It's just they didn't need screens like we did. It's where we may not necessarily see it, but progression will happen. And the fear factor is always going to be there. There's always going to be that fear. But generally speaking, we're dealing with something that in its core is a simplistic task that when it's well practiced and well used and well developed over time can benefit us tremendously with a lot of different things. It's just, again, like you said, it's where we haven't created the technology yet. So, it's like, just be a little patient. Just honestly, that's really what it is. It's like, why isn't it? It's like, dude, it's it's the beginning of the 21st century. You know what I mean? Like the technology for AI has been around for what? 28 years, 29 years? It's not a long time.
Yeah, yeah, and especially, I mean, if you look at all of history, how long it took to get anything done.
Takes a
What's
while.
Yeah,
Yeah.
what's happened since the dawn of the 21st century is unprecedented. It's exponential, right? But yeah, that's an interesting sort of topic, as well as looking at science fiction, and how creative visionaries sort of view the future and what technology will look like
Yeah,
versus.
Gene Roddenberry was, I feel like the man was very much ahead of its time because he really did think outside of the box of what possibly the future could be, you know?
Yeah, and looking at what their view of it is versus how it actually progresses.
Yeah.
But really, they're sort of the innovators, right? They're the creators, because it's their vision that sort of sets the tone, and then people with the technical know-how come in behind them and try to make it happen. And sometimes along the way, they find um, better ways to do it, or maybe the way that it's presented in science fiction isn't feasible, so they have to find out something different to make it work. Um, but yeah, it's interesting to see the way the technologies work out. From concept drawings all the way to products that you have in your hand.
Yeah, and it's kind of, I mean, you mentioned since like the beginning of the 21st century, like since the 2000s till now, which has been 24 years, is exponential. I mean, the amount of technology and the way that things have progressed is insane. I mean, you think about like the early 2000s, even with like cars, there were just plastic bubbles that looked like shit. They drove like shit. Okay, let's be real. All right. My mom had a 2001 Toyota Camry when I was growing up. Okay. Did not look cool. It was nice. Drove terrible. I'm not going to lie. But no, I'm just messing around. But it's like, it's not that long ago. And the thing
Yeah,
is, it's like in that time frame, it's done more good than it has done harm. Yes, there has been a lot of consequences and there has been a lot of problems, but look at all of the things that it has allowed us to do and where we've gotten with it. You know what I'm saying? There's always those two sides, particularly with these kind of things.
yeah, yeah. It's really interesting. I don't think of myself as being an old guy, right? But I'm older than the internet. And you think about the pre-internet world and what it was like compared to what it is now, and anybody who can't remember what life was like before the internet, they really have a qualitatively different experience of what it's like to be human, of what reality is like, um,
Your
because it,
reality
it
was
it
very
makes that much of a
physical,
difference. Yeah, yeah, and
very,
and
very
it was very
physical.
and it was very local, right? My
Yeah,
whole universe was in my hometown, right?
right.
Because
Yeah.
unless there wasn't anything more interesting on the news or on the TV than the news, you never cared about what was going on in the wider world, right? It was just your friends and your family and whoever was around. And that was it, and
Whatever was on a random newspaper sometimes, those
yeah,
headlines.
yeah. And so, I think to younger people that might sound like kind of sad or kind of lame or something, but there's something to be said for shutting out some of that stimulus, right? Shutting out some of that noise, and bringing your attention and your focus and your sort of um, thoughts about it back into a more focused place. Because I
Yeah.
think that lots of times people get so caught up with world events that they let it sort of dictate their whole lives, right? I've seen people become depressed and anxious and all kinds of things over stuff that they wouldn't have even been aware of right before the internet. And you go, hey, and I'm not saying you shouldn't think about any of that, right? We need to think about a lot of that stuff in order to come up with
Hmm.
solutions, but
Yes.
at the same time, don't lose sight of what's right in front of you. There's good stuff happening right where you are. So if you pay attention to that, maybe you're not going to be so upset about what's going on out across the world.
Yeah, the thing is that I think it's become very part of American culture where, because we're so much of a melting pot and we come from all different places of the world, where we have to stick our noses into other places' business where we shouldn't be meddling. It's none of our business. We have enough problems here. And I understand that attitude and mentality. But the thing is, like, there are many people that can relate with you that have that problem. And then there are those, which are probably over a million, a few 100 million, that don't have that problem and don't have that issue. So it's also kind of knowing where you should not be putting yourself. It's like, where if you want to protest or say something or stand your mark, know why you're standing for the mark, not just be one of those people that speak on behalf of other people. You know, it's like, I think those people know how to speak very well for themselves.
Yeah, yeah.
Keep things local.
Yeah,
I like that. Yeah.
it's virtue signaling, right? Um,
Oh,
which
hands down.
it's if it, you know, and I think that you can make general statements, right? I'm all for everybody having equal rights and equal access to resources and that type of thing. Um, but at the same time, I don't have the lived experience to go out and make definitive statements for certain groups, right? And like you said, they're more than capable of doing that for themselves. Um, my job is just to make sure that they have a platform, right? That people listen. But
Right.
anything beyond that is it's disingenuous. You know.
And it's also where, the complexity of AI. It's because, again, when you try to take the sci-fi and then you put the AI on top of it, you end up not actually seeing what the picture is. It's, he was talking also about, like, for example, with blockchain and using cryptocurrency. There are people that this is great for, and then there are people that this is not great for. Basically screaming, yelling, "Well, I think this is all scams." You may feel that way, and that's great. But there are people that spend a lot of their research and time, and I think they know what they're doing. They seem like they know what they're doing, and they're able to assess and figure out the complexities and what works and what doesn't. And it doesn't make you dumb that you don't know those things, right? It just makes you you and them. It's that simple. You don't have to know everything.
Yeah, and here's the other big thing, right? Is like nobody's making you buy crypto,
No.
right? If you don't believe in, I don't know, gay marriage or whatever, nobody's making you marry somebody of the same
Yeah,
sex. Like
nobody's
this
telling
stuff,
you to kiss a boy.
yeah, like this stuff is not, it doesn't affect you um other than you wanting to have a dog in a fight that signals your virtue. And yeah, it's not a good place to be. And unfortunately, yeah, that's one of the downsides of the internet, right? Of having this connectivity across the world and being able to find groups of people, um, some of whom are doing good, but unfortunately, it makes some of the people who are doing bad. it allows them to link up and form groups as well.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the most controversial and the most evil tend to get the biggest spotlight. So
Yeah, and it also just has to do with being it seems hard, honestly, to be able to limit yourself and being able to go with a flow mindset, meaning where not everything has to bother you. Like, is it to me that seems so hard. And again, there will be times where it's hard to be able to contain things. But my God, if you let every fucking thing bother you, seriously, how far are you going to be able to go? It's like where you can sit across someone that doesn't agree with you.
yeah,
Why is that so hard?
right. And I mean, and that's a result of polarization just generally, right? It started out with it was old people versus young people, right? It was the old people calling out the young people snowflakes.
Back in my days, yeah.
Right, but then, the old people started to be just as offended as the young people, just about different stuff, right? And so it goes old, young, it goes political right, political left. Any two groups you can think of that can sort of be pitted against each other, you can develop this mindset that the other group is just out of their mind and bugs the hell out of you. But it's that's your problem. That's not their problem, right? That's your problem that you're bugged
Hmm.
by it. It's your problem that you view it a certain way. And of course, for me, right, philosophy is the act of not taking things at face value, right? Of asking the deeper questions. So when I run across somebody who doesn't see things the way I do, I just say, well, why is that? Why do you think that way? Right.
Hmm. Yeah.
And if you ask that question a couple times, and then you bring up an objection to the way somebody's thinking, they're much more inclined to say, "Oh, well, yeah, I didn't see it that way," rather than as soon as they start talking, tell them they're an idiot, right? That never goes over well, or that they're wrong. So yeah, it's just being civil, and it's trying to. If there was just the slightest attempt to understand other people, I think things would be much better off. But
No, I agree with you 100%. Like I had the other night, I was out. I usually go to game nights on Wednesday, and there was a bartender there. Her name's Tess. And we were, talking about like particularly with the gay community and different groups. And she kind of was like, I don't want to butt in. And I was like, you don't butt in. Go ahead. She's like, I'm not familiar with these things you want to explain. And I was like, sure. And she just sat there and like we were just talking back and forth. Me, like she was asking me questions and I was explaining things back. That to me means a lot because it's where, again, you're able to connect with somebody. They're like, hey, I'm not familiar with this, but I'm curious. Can you, instead of holding yourself back as like, no, I don't want to, I don't want to hear about that. Why not?
yeah, yeah, curiosity. I mean, that's what it boils down to is humans. I mean, we're learning machines. That's what we do. Every second, we're learning stuff. We're taking in information and we're integrating it with stuff that we already know, and we're forming new pictures of the world, right? And so, being curious and inquisitive comes naturally to us. And I think that sort of following that and wanting to understand other people and other viewpoints and why things work the way they do, um, that's a healthy thing, right? When you decide that you're not going to learn anything new because you know what you believe, that's a dangerous spot, right? I always keep all my viewpoints open, right? When people ask me, well, what do you believe? I go, I like to believe that I can change my mind. That's the most important part.
Yeah. And honestly, it's not necessarily the healthiest mindset. It's the clearest mindset. It's because you're able to focus on what you have the most control of. The thing is, as humans, is we have the most control over ourselves. That's really what it boils down to. You can always make those connections with other people. You can always have those interactions with other people. But if you can't see yourself and value yourself and be able to realize that you have time to grow and progress and learn and be patient, you're just limiting yourself in your life at the same time.
Yeah, and what it boils down to is that a lot of people thought a lot more, have thought less about themselves than about anything else, right? And that's uh, what's sort of popular in psychotherapy right now is mindfulness, which is based on Buddhist meditation and things, and that's the whole principle of it, right? Is introspection, is the ability to identify in yourself the thoughts and emotions that you're having rather than just going with them, rather than just reacting to them, rather than just being on autopilot and letting the thoughts and emotions sort of rule you and guide you. Instead, it's just taking that one split second in the present moment to step back and say, "Hey, I'm angry or I'm uncomfortable. Why? Why does this make me uncomfortable? Is there a reason for it? Should it? Should I ask some questions? Should I think about this a little bit more?" And that 1 second, I mean, that makes all the difference in the world, I think, in terms of how you relate to other people.
Really tying in within clarity, being
Mhm.
able to put the pieces together. Sometimes the thing that you need the most is to be able to see the picture as it is whole. But then you can zoom into that picture and start to see, maybe this is not good. No, I don't like that. You fixate. So it's like being able to find that right balance between those things, because you can be really good at it, but at the same time, you can really waste a lot of your life away by just do it. No one's stopping you.
Yeah. Yeah, and, the identification of, um, the uh, the sort of interrelatedness of everything, kinda like we were talking earlier. Um, it's kinda like fractal geometry, right? You start out with this picture, and you zoom in on a certain spot, and then the picture shows itself again. You zoom in on a certain spot, and it reveals itself again, right? Um, it's kind of similar, right? Sometimes those things that you have a certain reaction to, if you look closely, the reason you have a certain reaction to it is because you're seeing some reflection of yourself, whether it's something that you like or dislike, or and that's what's causing you to have a certain reaction to the way you are to it.
It's almost where there's a deeper side to it as well. It's, I've kind of touched a little bit earlier where we have our subconscious, and it's kind of interesting in how it's kind of like the voice in your head. That's kind of the best metaphor. And there's sometimes things that you may get startled by where you're like, why don't I like this? And sometimes it's all the way in the back of your head. And you're like, oh, that's why. There's that complexity at that plays where literally that picture that happened, totally forgot that ever happened, is still back there. You're like, oh, okay, now I remember.
Yeah, yeah, and that's
Creeps up on you.
the interesting part of the human brain, right? And that's where it's sort of the analogy of the human brain as being like a computer falls apart, right? Because your computer has a hard drive, and so that's where all your information is stored, and that's where all your information is retrieved from. The human brain doesn't work that way, right? You don't have a hard drive in your brain. The closest thing that we have is the hippocampus, which is in charge of learning and storing short-term memories, usually up to 2 days, around there. But then after that, it goes into long-term memory. And there's no specific spot in the brain where long-term memory is. There's no hard drive, right? It's just all electrical signals. And so you look at people under fMRI remembering stuff, and you just see a bunch of electrical signals, and then they go, oh yeah, and you go, yeah, it's really strange.
Well, one of my favorites is like pertaining with food, because I come from a Middle Eastern background, and it's just a thing. Even with other cultures with food, it's where you smell, and that turns into the memory. See, and it's a senses that turns. And the interesting thing, like even with the scans, it's not even the part of the brain that is with the sensation of sense, smell, or even the hippocampus. It's sometimes even on like the left side of the brain in an area that's just about like activity and habilitation. The brain is very weird in that way, where it doesn't, honestly, if you ask any neuroscience, like neuroscientists or neurologists or any, they'll tell you honestly, they're like, we don't really get it. They don't. And it doesn't mean that they don't know what they're doing. It's they know what they can up to a limited point. And it's crazy.
Yeah,
It
yeah. I mean,
really is.
yeah, we've got a general picture, but the details aren't at all fleshed out.
No.
And really, I mean, the main takeaway is that the brain is a distributed network, right? There's no, people talk about the prefrontal cortex as sort of being the central executive, like that's your personality, that's the decision maker. But there's nothing that the prefrontal cortex does in isolation, right? It's always drawing on different parts of the brain. And it's kind of demonstrated by, cases of people with brain damage to certain areas, right? Damage to certain areas will suddenly cause, very, very distinct problems in functioning, specifically with the temporal lobe, or with the hippocampus, right? There was a guy who had seizures and he had to have his hippocampus removed, and he could never remember anything that happened more than 2 minutes after he had the surgery. So his whole life he was stuck as being 16 years old and at the hospital, and he'd always just come up with these strange reasons for why he was where he was, or why he could do what he could do.
That's
Um,
really wild. I mean, because it's almost where people have those freak accidents where they're hit their heads really hard. And I know one particular case where she became bipolar, like full on bipolar, like manic. And this is a person that was completely fine before. And she just got whacked in the head by a car door.
yeah,
Crazy.
yeah, yeah. It's real sensitive. The brain is extremely sensitive, but the whole thing works together. So if you have damage in any one area, it's going to manifest itself sort of across functionality.
Isn't that interesting? Because that is kind of a thing we as humans do to other humans. So when we no
Yeah,
longer function, we start to attack others and blame them for our problems.
yeah, and the distributed aspect is interesting as well, because you don't realize what it takes to see something, right? You have processing that goes on in the eye, in the optic nerve, in V1, which is located in the back of your brain, your occipital lobe, and then throughout the brain. And what they found is that people who have damage to the V1 section, right? If your eye and your optic nerve is intact, but V1 is damaged, people will report being blind. They'll insist that they can't see anything. But if you hold out a ball or a box or anything, and ask them to grab it, they'll reach their hands out to the exact size and shape of whatever it is you're holding out to grab. And if you ask them, hey, where's the light in the room? They'll say, there is no light. I'm blind. I can't see anything. You'll say, well, just take a guess. Where's the light? They'll point to where the light is every single time, right? Because the eye and the optic nerve are still intact. So there's still some information coming in, but the brain, the thing that tells you that the information that's coming in means something, that's what's broken. So the
It's
information is there, but the thing that says that the information has value is busted. So as a result, you're
yeah.
saying, I can't see anything, when in reality you can.
It,
So
it's
yeah,
co-
a bunch of
it
interesting cases.
it's kind of weird because I wear glasses and I have a very low prescription. Pretty much my whole family, like all of the males, including my dad, both my brothers, we all wear glasses. But I have where I'm farsighted, but also my eyes don't focus. So a lot of the times, if I take off my glasses, I could see something right in front of me, but it's like my eyes, like, a cheap, crappy camera you get off of Temu, it doesn't focus. But then I put these on, and then my eyes focus. It's just like it's so kind of crazy, and how like there's just a simple way of just tricking your brain, like, hey, now you can see just fine, and we call them glasses.
Yeah.
It kind of is that type of premise where it's a simple fix to a complex solution.
Yeah. There's a lot of things going on, and all it takes is something being off a little bit for it to create a big problem, right? And that's just the way that the brain works.
I just like it's kind of even strange, like even when you look at like LASIK surgery, right? Where you literally have them putting a laser and allowing a person to be able to have like absolute clarity, even though their vision has been impaired. In a way, it's kind of tricking the mind because you're kind of removing a layer and allowing that to heal, but there is still that damage. But no longer the brain processes that; now it processes clarity.
Yeah, it's interesting because the vision problems come from not having the right curvature on the lens of the eye. And so you'd think what's interesting to me from as a with that, with a psychology background is that the human brain shows a remarkable plasticity, an ability to adapt to certain things and cause it to become normal. It's strange to me that if the curvature of a lens is wrong on the eye, that the brain doesn't over time adjust to it and cause it to focus right. It seems like maybe it should, given all of its other superpowers, but
That is one thing that we had to learn, like especially with cameras, with lenses, is being able to have a lens that had the right materials and the right quality to be able to have that focus and be able to process all of that light that was coming through. Because, if you think about it, like an old film camera, literally what's happening is when you snap that picture, the lens, like there's a shutter that opens for like a very short period and just traps that light. And that exposure expands and gets on the film. And that's how, with the process, of course, the photo eventually gets developed. But all of that complexity, a lot of it can be learned from the eye, figuring out how the brain interacts with the eye and being able to focus in and see, depending on the light, depending how bright it is, and different things of the nature. And there's a lot of things that we've kind of learned around from nature to be able to create. But it's just kind of weird when you look at like glasses and even like cameras, where that is a very big part of it in many ways.
yeah, I think that we're always developing tools that sort of mimic and extend our own capabilities, right? So the camera, like you said, it's sort of built like an eye. You have this curved lens, and you have with a digital camera, right? You have these certain pixels that have certain color receptors, very similar to the human eye. And yeah, I mean, it comes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the episode, right? Artificial intelligence is just that, except instead of for the eye, it's for the brain, right? We're trying to develop something that operates the way that we do.
Hmm.
Um,
And
and
how we
we're
think.
getting and we're getting something that can mimic it, but it's really not doing it the same way that we do it.
No.
So it'll be interesting to see where it goes in the future. If we do come up, because what we have now is large language models, right? And basically all it's doing is looking at each word that you're writing and the order that you wrote them in and trying to determine what the most predictable next thing would be and kind of coming up with answers that way. And so it feels very smart to us because we're a language-based creature, right? That's the way we think, is in language. Um, but our own thinking doesn't occur that way. And consciousness certainly doesn't occur that way.
No.
But now with multimodal and neural network AI, they're getting a little bit closer. a little bit closer. So yeah, 5, 10, 15 years from now, how will we be doing it? What will it look like? What will it be capable of? Who knows? And at what point do we actually say that something else may be conscious? It's an interesting question.
It is. And it's one of those that we may never get an answer, but if we do, it might get us even more curious.
Yeah, I think so.
Joel, if I'm not mistaken, your podcast is from nowhere to nothing.
Yep.
Cool. How do you have your episode schedule? Because I know you have like a bunch of other topics. You have like tribalism also that's mentioned there. You definitely seem like the person, if you want to talk about philosophy for hours, this is your guy. Like hands down. Yeah.
Yeah. No, the longer the conversation, the better, as far as I'm concerned.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, it's basically what we do is we generally start with just one word or two words, and we'll spend an hour usually looking at formative thought, what historians and philosophers have said about it in the past, and then just talking about it, discussing it within the context of the previous thought, and then asking speculative questions about what it means for humankind, what it means for us as individuals, and going from there. So, yeah, we try to release episodes weekly, and we jump around from topic to topic. We take listener requests, that sort of thing. But yeah, it's kind of the layout of the podcast.
Do you have a host that you work with, or it's you yourself, like you're solo?
Yeah, I'm the host, and then my regular resident expert is my old philosophy professor from college.
Oh wow.
Yeah, but then occasionally we have guests on. So like the episode you listened to had a special guest, but 95% of the time it's me and the resident expert.
I kind of like that. It also kind of has like that dynamic of, like professor and student,
Yeah.
very much. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what when I started the podcast, that's what I was sort of trying to recreate, because I loved philosophy class in college, and I thought, man, I just kind of want to recreate those conversations, right? Because they're not the kind of conversations you can have just anywhere, right? You can't show up to work and on lunch be like, "Hey, what's the meaning of life?" Like your coworkers don't really go for that sort of thing.
No, they don't. They really don't.
So yeah, so instead you have to create your own podcast and invite your philosophy professor on.
Oh,
But yeah,
goals.
it's fantastic. It's the highlight of my week every week.
Where can people find the podcast, and do you have any social links?
You can find the podcast pretty much anywhere. If you look at From Nowhere to Nothing, you'll find it. Spotify, Apple, anywhere you listen to podcasts.
Anywhere and everywhere.
Yeah. I'm terrible I'm the world's worst marketer, so I don't have a whole lot put into it.
We should make a club, worst marketers of the year. Can we get a reward, please? Woo!
Yeah, it's like I just want to do the substance part of it. I just want to have the conversations. I've tried doing the marketing stuff, and it's just a slog, and it feels disingenuous.
Yeah,
and stuff,
it does. So. I feel you.
But I mean,
Keeps going.
Obviously, obviously, I'm never going to be Joe Rogan famous, but people do find you, and you develop a following, and I think that overall they like listening to these kind of conversations. So
the way I look at it is, you never can be Joe Rogan, but you can always be yourself. You can be the best Joel at podcasting. I can be the best Dave at podcasting. We can be the best versions of ourselves at podcasting. And it's like, it all comes down to an idea that you really, really want to do, and you stick through it. Like having that person that you had those conversations with and literally being able to make a podcast about it,
Yeah, it's fantastic. And then, the magic of the internet is being able to join people on their podcasts, right? Because doing this show is completely different from doing my show, which is completely different from doing, the 25 other shows that I've been a guest on. Each one's different, but the thread that ties them all together is people who want to have meaningful conversations, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to do face-to-face out in public in sort of casual conversations, because not a lot of people have an hour to sit down and talk to you about their deepest, darkest fears.
Like nuclear power.
Yeah. AI, that
I
sort
will
of thing.
preach that shit till the day I die. I'm sorry. If I'm gonna get like a nuclear tattoo on my arm, I will do it. I'm just saying.
Yeah, and I don't know. I think, it sounds like fusion power might be on the horizon too, which would be even bigger, but
Bro,
that-
fusion is just another level of technology. I had to explain it using coasters and a plastic bag, because she was like, "What do you mean mass over density?" And I was like, "Okay." And I literally had to like physically do. Now I kind of know how they feel, in class, and they have to like physically like take things. They're like, "This is what it is. This is how it works. Okay, you got it. All right, I'm done. I'm leaving. Have a great day."
yeah. Some people it's hard to wrap your brain around. Yeah, imagine, well, first we're going to heat stuff up hotter than the sun. You're like, whoa, wait a minute, what?
What?
Yeah.
No, can I like move my house before you start doing that, please? Like, just get like a warning, like a week and a half. They don't like 2 weeks, 2 weeks. But yeah, if you want to check out the podcast, we're on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube at Lost in the Groove Pad for all of you out there. And yeah. Oh my God, oh my God, this has been over an hour. Holy shit. Listen, when you get into the deepness of things, it goes on forever. It really does.
Lost in the groove.
Lost in the groove, baby. All right, we'll catch you folks in the next time. Bye, everybody.